And ladies and gentlemen, next speaker is Marc Ozawa. He is a expert in energy and in common trust, former researcher in NATO Defense College, and he's really good in his research activities in NATO-Russian relations and trust, and currently working for the University of Cambridge and Yale University, if I have a correct bio. If not, sorry for that, Mr. Ozawa. And he will describe the aspects of trust between European and Russian energy institutions, and how to deal with the aspects to secure the energy security. Mr. Ozawa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for the introduction and the invitation to participate in the conference this year. I'm sorry I wasn't able to come in person, but I'm glad that I can at least participate virtually. I'm going to, I have a few slides to help sort of guide my presentation here. So let me just pull this up and bear with me one moment. It worked yesterday and it works today. Great. All right, so as was mentioned, I'm going to talk broadly on the concept of trust and also distrust in European and Russian energy relations. Most of the points that I will speak on are part of a book that I wrote and was published a few months ago. And I will cover some aspects of the book, but I'll try to keep my comments short. And maybe in the discussion period, if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to address them. First of all, the book and the research that I'll be presenting on was funded by a few organizations, and I'm obligated, not only obligated, but I would like to give credit where credit is due. I would not have been able to do the research for this book without the help of the NATO Defense College, a few centers within the University of Cambridge, and also the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies, which is one of the first organizations that stepped up to help fund this research project. And this is, yes, so as I mentioned, I'll be giving you sort of a synopsis of the main points of the book. Here's the cover of the book. It was published by Palgrave Macmillan in December. And these are the main questions of the book. Now, given the time constraint, I won't be able to address all of these questions in my presentation, but if you have any follow-up questions afterwards, I'm happy to talk about those. The first is, across Europe, why would some countries allow themselves to become so energy dependent on Russia? The second question is, how is trust or distrust formed in the context of major international energy deals? And this is perhaps a bit more of a scientific question, and I won't go too much into the concept of trust in political economy and sociology. But it was one of the questions that was at the start of this book. What was the impact of trust or distrust in Europe's energy trade relations with Russia? And finally, how has Russia's invasion of Ukraine impacted trust with between Europe and Russia and their energy trade overall? So just to give you a short overview of the structure of the book, it's pretty short. It's about 120 pages, 5 chapters. I think the first chapter, the second chapter, and the fifth chapter are probably the most interesting and accessible to non-social scientists or to a broader audience, especially the second chapter on European and Russian energy relations after Ukraine. And here, when I say after Ukraine, I'm referring to when the war actually began, beginning in 2014. And I also address in the chapter the impact of the second invasion in 2022. The third and the fourth chapter are a bit more of the a bit more scientific, but if you're interested in the methodology, those chapters might interest you. So for those of you who may ask why address the issue of trust in this context? Well, first of all, as an academic, I noticed that there was a gap in the research and the literature. So that was the first thing that was interesting for me. But as I began to research European and Russian energy trade relations, and I conducted interviews with some of the decision makers from companies and also ministries that were making policies. Many of these people attribute some of their important decisions to trust, to the issue of trust. And when I say important decisions, I mean the decision, the way I set up the study was the decision to form a contract with Russia. The second one was if a dispute or a conflict arose, how did they handle it? And the third is when the contract is finished, what did the decision makers decide to do about it? Did they decide to continue their trade relations, or did they decide to end it at the completion of the contract? Now, from more of a scholarly scientific perspective, especially in political economy, the issue of trust is important because it lowers the cost of doing business, it facilitates cooperation, it lowers the risks of disputes and conflicts, and likewise facilitates dispute and conflict resolution. And I think Francis Fukuyama described trust as the oil that greases the wheels of economic activity, which is another way to think about it. I won't go too much into the methodology of the study, except to say that it was a combination of a comparative case study with the primary samples being German companies and policymakers, Russian companies and policymakers, British actors, and Norwegian actors. But there were also, on the side, I looked at a couple of joint French and Russian joint ventures and Italian and Russian joint ventures. Most of the information, the primary source information, came from interviews. I also used survey data, and I used a framework that scholars out of the University of Birmingham, which are at the forefront of this trust research in international relations, that they created, looking at hedging strategies. But if you have any questions regarding the methodology, I'm happy to explain that in more detail. And now I have a few maps to show for those of you who are coming to the question of European and Russian energy trade without a background. I think maps are always helpful, and even for someone who's been looking at this topic for some years now, maps are still helpful. This is a map of the European natural gas pipeline infrastructure. And what you can see here is where the natural gas supplies are coming from. Most of the pipeline infrastructure was built to move supply from east to west. And this created some problems beginning in the late 2000s when there were disputes between Ukraine's Naftogaz and Russia's Gazprom, which were I would argue, primarily politically motivated rather than commercially motivated. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And you can also see that there's pipeline infrastructure to move supply from the Norwegian continental shelf and the North Sea south to the main continental Europe, and also from North Africa northward to southern Europe. Now, it's important to keep the pipeline infrastructure, any infrastructure in mind, because this really constrains or limits the options that policymakers and company executives have when something bad happens, which was the case in 2022 and also in 2014. And I'll explain a little bit more about how the decision makers responded to that. This map is already outdated, but this shows the level of natural gas dependence from Europe towards Russia before 2022. And you can probably tell from the colors, the darker blue indicates a higher level of dependence. And then there's sort of a medium blue and a light blue. And the gray is where the countries had little to no energy trade with Russia in terms of natural gas. I think it's pretty well known now that the country that had the largest imports from Russian natural gas in terms of volume, but not in terms of dependence, was Germany, and next was Italy. And this map has changed since 2022. Another map that is interesting, and this was the starting point of the research project. Here I developed a ranking of countries based on level of trust. Now, when I say trust, I'm referring to specific actors. I'm referring to policymakers that deal with issues of energy trade, company executives, and also journalists and civil society groups that were focused on energy security in these countries. And from that sample, I developed a similar sort of color coding scheme. And what's interesting, it's also important to mention that the survey that I used to gauge the level of trust was focused only on energy trade with Russia. It was not touching on other issues outside of this one specific issue. And you can see, probably it's no surprise, low trust in Poland and the Baltic states, somewhat low trust in Finland and some Eastern European states, but a higher level of trust in Central and Western Europe. Now, of course, this has changed since 2014 and since 2022. But in terms of natural gas and oil contracts, you have to also have a longer view, because many of these contracts are long-term contracts. They last in the 2 to 3 decades time span. So it's important to understand what the starting point was. So I will take you to the main points of the book, the main conclusions that I think would be interesting in the context of the current geopolitical situation that we find ourselves in today. The first is that European and Russian energy relations were not only determined by politics and commerce, which many policymakers argued, many European leaders argued up until 2022, that energy trade with Russia was not political, it was entirely commercially driven, and that Europe should compartmentalize energy trade with Russia and separate it from any sort of political relations with Russia. But trust was also influenced by history, culture, and individual personalities. In the sample that I analyzed of some energy company executives and policymakers, it was interesting to see how there were these interpersonal relations that had existed for many years, even decades, going back to, say, the 1980s. And these networks were very determining on how joint ventures and contracts with Russian companies were communicated to policymakers and also to the publics of these European countries. The case studies show an interplay between political and commercial and also trust factors on the outcomes of the joint ventures and the contracts. And what I do not argue in the book, I do not argue that trust is what drives these contracts and joint ventures. It's just one aspect. But over the course of these contracts, which can last 20 to 30 years, sometimes commercial factors are the most determining. Other times political factors are the most determining. But especially, and this is quite interesting after 2014, in the case of Germany, trust factors were, I would argue, the most determining and partly explain why Nord Stream 2 would continue in construction after the events of 2009 with the Russo-Georgian War, with all of the contract disputes between Russia and Ukraine in the late 2000s and early 2010s that created supply disruptions in Europe, and why under pressure from other European countries and beyond, German leaders would continue to advocate for the construction of Nord Stream after 2022. Another important point is that until the Russia-Ukraine war, which here I'm saying began in 2014, commercial interests prevailed generally in Western Europe. And what I mean by that is that decision makers in Western Europe were driven primarily by commercial interests up until 2014. After 2014, there was a shift. Some European countries and also company executives began to acknowledge that you can't separate politics from economics, that especially from the Russian perspective, there is a spectrum of driving factors ranging not only from commerce to politics to security, but also to history and culture and so on and so forth. In the East, in the Central and Eastern Europe, political factors were more often taken into account in their energy relations with Russia. And this is why we have examples of, even before 2022, the liquefied natural gas facility was approved and constructed and financed in Świnoujście, in Poland, but also in the Baltic states, in Lithuania. And some countries wanted to create a diversified portfolio, recognizing the energy security risk of dependence on Russian oil and gas exports, while other countries, and here, of course, I think the best example is Germany, waited until 2022 to seriously invest in in LNG and other alternatives to importing Russian natural gas. The next point I think is more interesting from an academic perspective. I won't go into too much detail, but it's enough to say that because of the physical limitations of transporting natural gas versus other commodities, natural gas requires a higher level of trust than oil trade, for example. And the final point that I want to make is that the Russia-Ukraine war has really damaged trust on both sides and has already changed the fundamentals of European energy security. I mentioned the new infrastructure that's being built, new investments to create more diversity of supply. And although I'm not a historian, part of the study that informed this book was historical. One interesting case where I draw some parallels is with the oil price spike and the oil crisis of 1973, when, as a result of the Arab-Israeli war and sanctions that were imposed by oil exporting countries in the region, this made European policymakers, European leaders really rethink where their supply was coming from. And it really destroyed trust in the MENA region, Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean, as a region for European energy security. And this is what sparked the interest in looking to other regions. Fortunately, the Norwegian continental shelf was being developed at the time, so that solved part of it. But some countries, and especially Germany, looked to the east, to the Soviet Union, as a new source of supply. I should say also that in the study, it's problematic to talk about Western and Eastern Europe without acknowledging the history, because much of the infrastructure that was developed between Russia and Western Europe during the Cold War was commercially driven, whereas the infrastructure that was built in Central and Eastern Europe, these countries had no choice. There was not a private sector that was deciding what would be commercially viable. So these countries, such as Poland, also inherited this infrastructure and then had to deal with it after the Cold War. And so, thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Applause. So thank you, Mr. Ozawa. You did a little bit more, 5 minutes longer than it was initially pre-planned, but it's not a problem because energy is an extremely important topic, and basically I'm really interested because my company has a hydrogen system to, let's say, manufacture hydrogen and transfer it to the electric energy. And I've got two simple questions. As you know, Poland's aspiration is to have nuclear power stations operating in our country. Basically, and initially, we are doing a lot of things to have smaller nuclear reactors deployed and giving the energy to entire system. And it's for the energy security and to be a little bit independent. And if there is a little bit more energy than we need, we can share it with friends, of course. But having the nuclear installations on the ground, in my opinion, is also the impact for the national and home security. What's your opinion about this? If it's good to have nuclear installations or not, based on experiences coming from, for instance, Ukraine, where such installations are the first targets attacked by Russian missiles and rockets. And the second point is exactly hydrogen. As you know, Germany stopped financing and supporting the electromobility. They stopped giving this financial support for owners of electrical cars, and they would like to sell it again to Poland. And our government wants to support, let's say, the potential owners of such cars. But in my opinion, the hydrogen is a future of being independent and being trustable and being reliable in terms of electrical energy. And how do you see the role of Germany in the European hydrogen system, which is gonna be one of the crucial political and economical topics in the near future? Are you still with us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm still with you. First of all, I apologize for going over time.
No problem at all.
So I'll try to address these questions pretty quickly. On nuclear installations, there are, I think, sound arguments on both sides that, in light of Fukushima, and this is what influenced German policymakers to come off of nuclear energy, that the safety risks are just too high, and what we're observing in the war in Ukraine, the fact that even Chernobyl had a role to play earlier just after the invasion, and concerns about what Russian armed forces were doing there. That nuclear energy, even if there's not a natural disaster, has some risk. And I don't think you can discount the risk. It just depends on what your companies, your public is the level of risk that they are willing to accept. The argument for nuclear energy is very clear. It is a proven technology that many would argue can be produced safely. That is the only way to address the climate and environmental concerns that we have in the near to long term, and that is also commercially viable. So, this really illustrates what is known as the energy trilemma, the energy security trilemma, where you have these different goals in energy policy decision making of security of supply, environmental security, and commercial viability. So, in recent history, over the last few years, Germany has paid a heavy price for coming off of nuclear, and I think is an example of why not to come off of nuclear, and is sort of a showcase in support of nuclear energy. So I think every society, every country has to understand the risks, the advantages, and come up with what is acceptable for them. The second point about hydrogen in Germany, Germany within the EU has made some drastic energy security steps, not only over the last 2 years since 2022, but since Fukushima. And there has always been, I think energy security has always been politicized in recent history in Germany, going back to the 1960s and 70s with the anti-nuclear movement there, and has been tied into other political issues. So Germany, I don't think is a good example of very sound energy policy making in the current environment, because energy security is quite political there, and they've tried to become more environmentally friendly. They've tried to lower the costs of energy, and they've tried to come off of dependence on Russia all at the same time, and it has created a bit of a mess there. So I think that the issue of hydrogen in Germany is that many investors and policymakers are realizing the costs, and the commercial viability of hydrogen, and there is beginning to be doubts about the commercial viability. Whereas Germany 10 years ago was one of the main proponents of hydrogen as part of the long-term energy security matrix. I think that within the EU, Germany will continue to play a strong role because of the size and the economic engine. But I just came back from a conference on energy policy Europe-wide, and it is widely recognized that Germany has problems right now, and is not a good example to look to in devising energy security policy. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you so much, and please stay with us. The next will be very short presentation of let's say myself. I don't want to be the main obstacle between the audience and the launch site. So I will be very short in giving you a perspective about the lessons learned from Ukraine and potential impact on the future of NATO forces. Unfortunately, there is not too much on the widescreen. It's very good. I can show you mostly everything like a magician, but in my opinion, we will stay for next couple of years with let's call it multi-domain operations. It's very simple to explain why, because as you know, those who are working on the military and those who are interested in military art, everything right now moves up. In the past, we had a statement that the sky is the limit. And today, Professor Radomyski said it's a clear sky, very beautiful weather, very suitable for the Air Force. No. Why? Because even Stevie Wonder can see you operating with the air jet if you have a clear sky. When we were with General Gromadziński deployed in Iraq, we had operational detachment Alpha from US Special Forces, and they operated only during the night. Why? Because right now, those countries who have the satellites for communication, for navigation, and for observation, those countries are at the suitable position to win any future wars. Why? Because the war doesn't pop up as a surprise. Because you can, if you have a satellites, you can observe the enemy. And Poland has to join the community of EU and NATO countries having such capability to observe the enemy. Basically, for the young students, there is a Polish company, is Polish-Finnish right now, called ICEYE, and there's only one from Poland. And the owner has like 31 years, and he's a really rich man. Why? Because he's got the constellation of the 23 micro satellites operating and giving real time pictures of the enemy's locations. And those pictures are transferred immediately to the Ukrainian armed forces. This is why the second domain which we need is a very high-speed ICT relations between sensors, effectors, and in the midterm decision makers, because everything in the high-pace conflict has to be done immediately. Somebody during the first panel told, it was also Professor Radomyski, that the Russians hit air defense assets, ground assets, and they were not on the site because the target is not going to wait for the joint fires coming from our side. So nobody on the battlefield will wait when the Polish artillery officers or tank crews will be deployed at the line of contact, reload the barrels, and then get ready for the live firing. No, everything is done in very quick periods of time. And to be accurate and not to use a lot of ammunition, General Gromadziński pointed out that the highest pace of, or highest rate of using ammunition during the combat operations in Ukraine, it was about 20,000. No, it's more. It's in the highest moment of operations, it was about 60,000 artillery shells shot by the Russians and 10,000 by Ukrainians. So that's the disadvantage of Ukrainian armed forces, that they don't have too many tubes and guns and ammunition. This is why the United West has to do a lot of things to deliver as quickly as possible, as many 155 and other types of ammunition immediately to Ukraine. And to operate with the combat jets and to operate with helicopters, attack helicopters, we need, again, secured, classified, and independent lines of communication. But I'm talking about the lines of communication. It means the relation between the two radio stations, those deployed on the ground, and another one which is on the aircraft. And the second domain we can see a little bit in Ukraine. It's mostly about drones and UAVs. Drones, it was said before, Ukrainians, they buy a lot of FPVs, first-person view drones. They are very cheap. Mostly the Chinese company DJI manufactures such drones, and they massively deliver the FPVs to Ukrainian armed forces. And this is only one exception. The Ukraine gives the authorization to deliver the Chinese products to Ukrainian army. But advanced technology connected with the artificial intelligence, that's the future. And we have to be aware. For instance, the Eastern Shield, the new project announced by the Polish MOD and by the Polish government, has to be something like a digital fortification instead of real fortification, because we have to stop the massive drones and UAVs attacks, like it was between the Iran and Israel 2 months ago. They sent a lot of maneuvering rockets and missiles together with the drones, basically UAVs, because the drone is the small one, and the UAV is a large platform. And the second point, we are approaching the stage when and where the real soldier, well-trained, well-equipped, will be replaced by the robots. And the robots operating with autonomous mode, not automatic, autonomous. Such robots, they have to be equipped with high-speed computers, central processing units. And we can observe, even if you go to YouTube and Boston Dynamics, they right now manufacture autonomous robots for the special forces. Also, the robots, we can use it to protect troops in assembly areas. Why? Because the robot doesn't need to go to the toilet, robot doesn't need to go to sleep. The robot doesn't go boring with a permanent mission to protect a particular piece of terrain. And the robot doesn't get ill. Robot can stay in the same position for many, many hours. What we need to do right now is just to replace the battery package, which takes like 2 minutes, and the robot is still in use. Next point is drones and UAVs. That's what I mentioned. And those countries or armies which first reach the capability to control not only one drone, lots of drones. This one will lead to the victory in the war, because it's much, much cheaper right now to use a single kamikaze drone instead of combat air jet. And based on my factory's experience, we are reaching the moment when one kamikaze drone, it's not jet, it's electric motor kamikaze drone, will cost less than one artillery shell. Artillery shell is about right now $5,000. We are reaching the standard. And the jet drone with the range of 300 kilometers is about right now $90,000 with the payload 45 kilos. One ATACMS missile costs $2 million. So the calculation is very simple. So we have to be ready for the dedicated space for drones and UAVs. And last one, integrated air missile defense. That was pointed out a couple of times during today's presentation. First of all, we have to be ready for any kind of such surprises like rockets and missiles flying over Poland, and nobody knows what to do with it. We have to get ready for such situation like in Iran, Israel, that we must destroy it before it flies into Poland. So this is why we have to reach the standard of integrated air missile defense, and this system has to include drones and UAVs. So just to avoid the situation, we will shoot the Patriot missile towards the Shahid or similar drone, because it's not, it doesn't make sense. The cost and the effect doesn't work. It's better to use 12.7 machine guns instead of expensive rockets. But drones and UAVs, together with the maneuvering precise missiles, that's the future. It is already present, but it's going to be the main tool for the future operations. And to end up, for those who would like to know what the targeting is, go to the DJI website and try to get the GeoSupport link, and you will find Poland, the map of Poland. And on this map, we can find all the military objects with the natural boundaries, with the natural descriptions. And in the Smart Chinese, they added this map to the website as a non-flying zone. There is only one possibility when the war gets started, and one of the Chinese decision maker will press the button, and those no flying zones disappeared. So they can operate with the DJI drones to destroy our critical infrastructure. So we have to, like General Hodges said in Vilnius, be like Finland, be ready. So we have to be ready for the next war, not for the war which is right now hopefully ending up in Ukraine. That concludes my short presentation, and we'll jump to a session of Q&A session, and General Hodges is still with us, together with Mr. Marc Ozawa. So, floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen. Whoever has a question, don't hesitate, and please ask them. Go ahead. Do we have a mic? It means microphone.
Mogę polski?
Tak.
Mam krótkie pytanie do pana generała Hodgesa oczywiście. Można?
Tak. Tylko do generała Hodgesa to można.
Można. Dzień dobry. Good morning. Panie generale, przed tym chciałbym powiedzieć wszystkim sceptykom, że Ukraina nie wpadnie. Nie wpadł, bo Ukraińcy jest silny ducha. To jest tak. Pierwsze. A i dlatego, że mam takie pytanie. Pan mówił o strategii. To jest bardzo ważne pytanie. I chciałbym zapytać, jeżeli mówimy o strategii, jak pan myśli, czy może być częścią tej strategii rozpad Rosji? Na małe takie albo wielkie kawałki. Dziękuję.
Hey, I'm sorry, but the translation did not start until the very end. Can the translator repeat the question, please?
Może pan jeszcze raz powtórzyć, bo szczerze powiedziawszy nie słuchałem. Z prostej przyczyny chowałem laptopa.
Dobrze, to zacznę od pytania. Pan generał mówił o strategii. To jest bardzo ważne pytanie, bo nie ma tej strategii, moim zdaniem, że nie ma tej strategii w Europie, w Stanach Zjednoczonych. Myślę, że w Ukrainie tak, nie bardzo dobrze z tej strategii, tej wojny. Ale kiedy mówimy o strategii, jak pan myśli, czy może być częścią tej strategii rozpad Rosji na małe, bo wielkie kawałki, jak pan mnie tu trochę tak poprawił, dekolonizacja tej Rosji.
Okay, General Hodges, did you hear the question with translation?
Okay, thank you. I understand the question now. I think that there is not a strategic objective that has been clearly identified in any aspect of this war other than to avoid escalation. So that's our biggest problem, is that we do not have a clearly defined objective. And it's very difficult to come up with a good strategy or policy if you don't have a clearly defined objective. I think there is a fear, however, by some in the administration and in Germany and perhaps in other countries, that if we help Ukraine defeat Russia, that could lead to the collapse of the Russian Federation and the breakup of Russia into its natural, the Russian Federation into its natural smaller parts. That's not the aim, but it should be. I would not be against that. I think this is an opportunity. But this is something that would have to happen from inside Russia. The United States has a bad experience when we have tried to bring about the collapse of a regime. So this is something that should happen organically, but we should not be afraid of it.
General Hodges, thank you. And I will follow this question with opinion I've heard from one of the Polish professors dealing with China. And China doesn't want to have Russia as some many separate countries. China wants to have Russia as one solid element of international relations. Why it's better to have one unstable instead of many unstable. And that's the one point the professor pointed out. And the second point is the nuclear power in the hands of Russian Federation. And after making, let's say, the artificial countries, how the nuclear power will go to those countries.
Okay, well, first of all, the premise of that statement is false. I mean, the Soviet Union broke up back in 1989, 1990. Nobody lost control of nuclear weapons. Nobody lost control of the energy, oil and gas infrastructure. And we were not even prepared. We had not anticipated that it would break up. So I think that fear of what will happen, of all kinds of instability, is overblown. Now, of course, if the Russian Federation breaks up, there will be some places where there's no doubt there will be violence. I think Chechnya would see finally an opportunity after having fought 2 wars of independence already. They might see opportunity. Other places, but truthfully, whether or not China has access to reliable gas and oil from Russia is not our strategic interest. Our strategic interest is that Russia stops invading its neighbors and stops trying to overturn this international rules-based order, which has been so beneficial for all of us in the West. I apologize that I have to drop off now. We've run a little bit longer than I had thought. I have another requirement, so I hope that you'll allow me to drop off now.
And the very last question is a formal question. Sir, can we put your presentation in the YouTube or other websites?
Yeah, of course. Please use it, whatever is best for you. I'm sure it will help people sleep better if they listen to it. So that, of course.
And sir, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hopefully, that was beneficial for all sides being engaged in this conference. And hopefully, we'll get together in the nearest future somewhere in Europe.
I would like
Hopefully in Kiev. Kiev for the peace talks and reconstitution processes.
a victory celebration. Thank you.
Yeah, victory celebration. Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Do we have time for one more question?
Oh,
Is the general still with us? Okay.
no.
Then it's a question for Dr. Ozawa.
Okay.
How would you estimate a risk in this scenario? Moldova is in the middle of the South Ukrainian border, and Moldova is in this special position that it both has a trans-gas pipe of over 34 billion of transport capabilities yearly. And Moldova has an increased activity of Russian separatists currently. So how would you estimate a risk of possible Russian separatists trying to possibly take over the gas transport through Moldova?
Well, thank you for the question. I would look at it in a few ways. One is for the separatists, what would threatening supply do to themselves? Would they be affected by cutting off supply, or would they not be affected? I think that Moldova has been dealing with the energy geopolitical fallout of the war for some time now in terms of energy prices, and any potential cut in further up the chain will affect them. I think that one example of how to deal with the threat is to look at how Europe has responded to 2022, and what removing Nord Stream from the energy matrix did to Europe. This was a threat that Russia could use against Europe for many years now, and it created a lot of fear, a lot of different views about energy dependence on Russia across Europe. And I think after 2014, the German government invested in a scenarios-based stress test to understand what a 3-week supply disruption or a 6-week supply disruption or a 9-week supply disruption would do. And all of that analysis became irrelevant when it actually happened. The one thing about, if Moldovan separatists in Transnistria were to use this as a threat, it's the sort of threat that you can only use one time. And I think that threat has become less powerful over the last 2 years, given the loss of Russian imports in the European energy matrix over the last 2 years. Moldova is, if there is sufficient European interest to support Moldova, the population size and the energy demands and needs are not impossible to achieve through reverse flows of natural gas, through emergency oil exports to the region. There are ways to take the threat out of that possibility, but it would require support from not only Moldova's neighbors, but also from the EU. Now, I understand that not only because of proximity, but also because of strong links with Romania, that Romanian policymakers are also imagining this sort of scenario. And there would be, I would count on some immediate support from Moldova's neighbors, especially Romania. So I think that the risk of separatists trying to do something drastic today is not as strong as it would be, say, 2 years ago, before 2022, and especially before 2014.
Okay, thank you
But
so
of
much.
course, yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just about to say that energy prices in Moldova have been quite high over the last 2 years, and the political situation there is very delicate. So you cannot overlook the risks of price increases and the effects that will have on politics, domestic politics within Moldova. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ozawa. Because it's 1300, let me finish this. Okay, Dr. Ozawa, the same question, formal question. Are we allowed to put your presentation with your speech on the website?
Yes, by
Yeah,
all
thank
means.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to very short summary, which is gonna be the open question I am going to leave you with. It's what we will do if Ukraine starts suffering lack of personnel. So they have a lot of military assets, they have a lot of ammunition, different types, but they don't have well-trained and well-equipped personnel to fight with the fuckers from Russian Federation. What the Europe, united with the States, do in such a scenario is an open question. Mr. Professor, hopefully I did my job well, or pretty.